A man stands in a supermarket aisle at 11 at night, a basket in his hand, and he does not know what he came in for. He came for something. He is sure of that. He stood at his front door, put on his shoes, walked 4 blocks under a sky he did not look at, and pushed open the glass doors with the small certainty of an errand. Now he is here, and the certainty is gone. The fluorescent lights hum above him. He picks up a bottle of something, reads the label without reading it, puts it back, picks up another. The aisle is very long. At the far end, a woman is doing exactly what he is doing, only with cereal. You have probably been this man. Welcome to my philosophy channel. Tonight we are going to talk about a feeling that almost everyone alive in this century carries, and almost no one can name. The feeling that you are running and arriving nowhere. The feeling that the things you buy do not quite become yours. The feeling that you are working hard for a life you would not recognize if you finally caught up to it. The quiet suspicion that something has been taken from you and that you cannot remember when. This is a long video, almost an hour. If you stay with me through all of it, you may begin to see what was taken, and when, and by whom. You may also begin to see that the man in the supermarket is not lost. He has simply been told for 400 years that the only real things are the ones he can put in his basket. Let us begin where he begins, not in the aisle. In a moment, years earlier, when a stranger on a screen told a woman she should be ashamed. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Couldn't Afford Lipstick. A man on a screen tells a woman she has not worked hard enough. The lipstick costs around $11. The woman has written into the live stream to say she finds it expensive. Millions of people are watching. The man on the screen, handsome, polished, very good at what he does not raise his voice. He simply suggests, with the patience of someone correcting a child, that the viewer might want to examine whether she has been working hard enough at her own life, whether her wages reflect her effort, whether the problem, in short, is her. The clip lasts less than a minute. Something travels through the audience that night. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. A small private flinch in millions of bodies at once. Because each person watching has, at some point, looked at a price tag and looked away and felt the same thing the woman felt. And now they have a name for it. The name is not working hard enough. This is the territory we are going to map tonight. Not the price of lipstick, the feeling. The conviction, settled deep in the modern person, that to be unable to afford something is a small moral failure. That poverty is not a condition that happens to a life. That it is a verdict on the life. Notice how strange this is. Your great-grandmother, if she was poor, was poor. The word described her circumstance. It did not describe her soul. She might have been ashamed of needing help. She might have hidden a worn coat under a better one when she went to church. But she did not lie awake at night, wondering whether her bank balance was a measure of her character. Nobody had told her it was. Somebody has told you. Not in one sentence, not in one moment, in 10,000 small ones. The colleague who asks where you went on vacation and waits. The cousin who says, gently, that anyone can make it if they really try. The video that ranks salaries by age. By the time the man on the screen says what he says, the ground has been prepared. He is not introducing the idea. He is pressing a bruise that was already there. Sit with this for a moment, because it is the door we walk through tonight. If you have ever calculated, on the way home from work, whether you are doing enough, if you have ever looked at someone richer than you and felt not envy but shame, if you have ever lied a little about what you can afford, not to impress them, but because admitting the truth felt like admitting a defect, you already know what we are talking about. You have lived in this country. You have learned its language without knowing you were learning anything at all. The strangeness is this: material poverty is older than civilization. Most people, through most of history, have had very little. Their poverty was the air they breathed. It produced suffering, certainly. Hunger, cold, the particular ache of watching a child want something you cannot give. But it did not, until very recently, produce the specific modern sickness we are circling tonight, which is the feeling that to be poor is to be guilty. That feeling is new, it is constructed, it has authors. And once you can see that, you can also see that the man in the supermarket aisle is not lost in his own life. He is performing, late at night, the only ritual he has been given for proving that he exists. He came to buy something. He cannot remember what. But he knows, in a way he could not put into words, that if he comes home with nothing, the night will feel like a defeat. How did we get here? That is the question for the next 10 chapters. We are going to trace it back, slowly, to a moment 400 years ago when a small group of philosophers decided that the things that cannot be measured do not count as real. Once that decision was made, everything else followed. The factory, the clock, the advertisement, the credit card, the live stream, the lipstick, the man with the empty basket at 11 at night. But before any of those things, there was a quieter loss. Before the world was made to measure, 3 things that used to belong together were taken apart: truth, goodness, beauty. When they were one thing, a life could be evaluated by all 3 at once. When they were severed, only one survived as a public standard, the one that could be counted. That is where we go next. Chapter 2. When truth, goodness, and beauty were one thing. A young man walks beside his teacher in Athens in the cool of the morning, and the teacher asks him not what he knows but how he intends to live. This is not a quaint detail. This is the entire shape of the ancient world, compressed into one conversation. To the Greeks, philosophy was not a subject. It was not what you did from 9 to 5 in a building called a university. It was the love of wisdom, and wisdom was a way of being. You could not separate the question of what is true from the question of what is good. And you could not separate either of them from the question of what is beautiful. They came together, or they did not come at all. The word the Greeks used was sophia. We translate it as wisdom, but the translation is too narrow. Sophia meant something closer to a life that had been thought through and lived out. A person who knew things, but also knew when not to demand to know them. A person of judgment. A person who could tell in a particular moment what the moment required. Aristotle put it like this: "The mark of an educated person," he wrote, "is to know not to demand proof of everything. Some things are felt before they are proven. Some things would be deformed by the demand for proof." Read that sentence again. It sounds quiet. It is not quiet. It is the line that the modern world will cross. And once it crosses it, will not cross back. In the world Aristotle is describing, the true and the good and the beautiful are interwoven. To live truly is to live well, and to live well is to live in such a way that your life is, in some small measure, beautiful. Not in the sense of decoration, but in the sense of having shape, having coherence, mattering as a thing matters. A bad life is not just a wrong life. It is also an ugly one. The categories speak to one another. Plato will say it in his own way. To be surrounded by beautiful things, he writes, can lift the beauty of the soul. He does not mean expensive things. He means things that are what they ought to be. The architecture of a temple, the proportion of a body in motion, the clarity of a friendship, the shape of a well-told story. These were not separate goods. They were facets of one good. This is the inheritance the medieval world will receive and translate into its own language. When Christian thinkers arrive, they reframe the picture. God becomes the convergence of every highest thing, the name for the unity of the true, the good, and the beautiful. You may not be religious. That does not matter for what we are doing tonight. What matters is the structure. For roughly 2,000 years across both pagan and Christian thought, the West held to one shared conviction. The real has many sides, and the sides hang together. To know the world is also to be moved by it. To be moved by it is also to be obligated by it. There is no clean separation between the laboratory and the heart. You can feel what a different way of living this implies. Imagine being asked, in such a world, whether your work has value. The question would not mean what it means to us. It would not mean, does it generate income? It would not even mean, do you find it meaningful? It would mean something larger. Does this work participate in what is true? Does it serve what is good? Does it produce something that has, in its own modest way, the shape of beauty? A potter could pass that test. So could a shepherd. So could a mother nursing a child at 3 in the morning. The test was not productivity. The test was alignment. Now imagine being asked, in such a world, whether you are poor. The word would still mean what it means. You would still have less than your neighbor. But it would not, by itself, carry the verdict it carries today. It would describe one feature of your life among many. The other features, whether you were honest, whether your house was peaceful, whether the work of your hands was good work, would weigh as much or more. Poverty without moral weight. Try to feel what that would be like, and you start to feel how far we have traveled. Something happened to this picture. Not in a year, across centuries, the threads that held truth and goodness and beauty together began to fray. A new way of thinking arrived that asked, with great patience and great force, whether the threads were really there at all, whether the only true things might be the things that could be measured, whether the others, goodness, beauty, wisdom, might be private feelings dressed up as eternal facts. The first crack was small. It came from an unexpected place, not from a philosopher in a study, from an astronomer with a telescope who looked up at the sky and noticed that everyone had been wrong about which thing was moving and which thing was still. Chapter 3. The day Earth started moving. In November of 1633, René Descartes sat alone with a manuscript he would never publish. He had spent 4 years writing it. Le Monde, the world, was his attempt to explain nature from first principles, to account for the formation of planets, the mechanics of gravity, the operations of the human body, all without relying on the authority of the Church. He was close to finishing. Then he heard what had happened to Galileo. Galileo had championed the Copernican model, the claim that the Earth revolves around the sun, and the Inquisition had placed him under house arrest. His books were banned. The message was clear. Descartes put his manuscript in a drawer. It would not be published until 1664, 14 years after his death. But Copernicus had already done something that could not be undone. For nearly 2,000 years, the Western world had operated on a single assumption so fundamental that it was invisible. The Earth does not move. Aristotle had said so. The Church had confirmed it. Every person who had ever stood on solid ground had felt it. The assumption was not argued for. It did not need to be. It was the floor. Then Copernicus suggested the floor was spinning. This was not merely an update in astronomy. It was something far more unsettling. If the most basic thing you can feel, the stillness of the ground beneath your feet, turns out to be wrong, then what else might be wrong? What else have you trusted simply because it felt obvious? That question entered Descartes like a splinter. He decided to doubt everything, not as a pose, but as a method, Sensory experience could deceive. Mathematics might be the trick of a malicious demon. Even the existence of his own body was, strictly speaking, uncertain. He stripped the world down to a single point of certainty, the famous one. I think, therefore I am. The act of doubting cannot itself be doubted, because to doubt is already to think, and to think is already to exist. From that one bright point, Descartes rebuilt everything: God, nature, the physical world. On the foundation of rational thought alone, reason became the only ground that could not move. Notice what happened in that move. Before Descartes, truth lived inside a larger house called wisdom. The house had many rooms, reason, but also intuition, faith, moral feeling, aesthetic sense, the accumulated judgment of a life. You did not have to prove everything. Some things were known by being lived. After Descartes, reason was no longer one room. It was the whole house. What could not be established by rational argument was not exactly denied. It was demoted, relegated to the private quarters. Feeling, intuition, beauty, the knowledge that lives in the body. These things still existed, but they no longer counted as knowledge. They were personal, subjective, soft. Descartes did not intend to destroy the old unity of truth, goodness, and beauty. He was trying to save knowledge from the church's control. He succeeded, but the tool rational doubt cut deeper than he meant it to. It severed the connection between what can be proven and what can be felt. And once that connection was cut, it would take centuries to realize what had been lost. The man who would push this further than anyone, who would make reason, not just the method of truth but its master, was a quiet professor in a town he never left. Chapter 4. The God called Reason, Immanuel Kant, never traveled more than 10 miles from Königsberg. His neighbors set their clocks by his daily walk. His life was a system, and the system he built inside that life would reshape everything that came after it. Kant's great move was to reverse the relationship between mind and world. Before Kant, the common assumption was that truth exists out there, and the mind goes to meet it. Kant said no. The mind does not conform to reality. Reality conforms to the mind. What we call knowledge is not a picture of the world, as it truly is. It is a picture shaped by the structures our minds bring to experience: space, time, causality. We know the world as it appears to us. What the world is in itself, apart from our perception, we cannot know, we never will. He called this his Copernican revolution. The comparison was deliberate. Just as Copernicus had moved the center of the solar system, Kant moved the center of knowledge from the object to the subject. Truth was no longer something discovered. It was something constructed, within the formal limits of reason. Read that slowly, because everything follows from it. If truth is what reason can establish, then what reason cannot establish is not truth. Kant did not say beauty and goodness were meaningless. He gave them their own domains, aesthetics, ethics, with their own rules. But he separated them from knowledge. The true, the good, and the beautiful, which had lived together for 2 millennia, were now divided into 3 departments that did not share a hallway. The philosopher John Caputo saw clearly what this cost. In Kant's hands, he wrote, "Truth was not destroyed. It was disciplined, trimmed, cropped to fit the dimensions of reason. What could not survive the cropping was quietly set aside." Hegel refused to accept this. Where Kant sat still in Königsberg and built a system of the mind, Hegel walked through a world on fire. In 1806, the young professor at the University of Jena watched Napoleon ride through the streets after conquering the city. He wrote to a friend, "I saw the world spirit on horseback." Truth, for Hegel, was not an abstract property of propositions. It was alive. It appeared in history. It sat on a horse. It bled. It had a date. Hegel fought to put truth back into the concrete. Truth is the whole, he said. Not a formula, but a process, a thing becoming what it is through contradiction and reconciliation. If you cannot give an example, it is not true. If it does not live somewhere in particular, in some body, in some moment, it is only a thought about truth, and a thought about truth is not yet truth. He was right about the diagnosis. But the current was already too strong. Reason had won the culture, the departments had been built. And inside those departments, the question of what makes a life good was slowly being replaced by a different question, one that could be answered in numbers. That question was, how much do you produce? Chapter 5. The Tailor Who Refused the Raise. In the late 18th century, English factory owners discovered something that baffled them. When they raised the piece rate, paying workers more per unit of cloth, production did not increase, it decreased. Workers who had been producing 10 units a day at the old wage now produced 7 or 8 at the new one. They earned the same amount they had always earned, and then they stopped. They went home. They sat with their families. They did nothing in particular, and they did it without guilt. Max Weber described this pattern in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism and gave it a name, traditionalism. The traditional worker did not think in terms of maximizing income. He thought in terms of sufficiency. He had a picture of a decent life. Enough bread, enough warmth, enough time to rest, and once the picture was filled, labor lost its purpose. Additional money was not a motivation. It was an abstraction. Why would a man work longer than he needs to? This drove the new industrialists to despair. The factories of early capitalism required something that had never existed before. A population willing to work not for enough but for more. Always more. The machines were built. The capital was raised. The raw materials were secured. The only missing ingredient was a human being who would show up at 6 in the morning and stay until 6 at night, day after day. Not because survival demanded it, but because something deeper, something moral, compelled it. That human being did not yet exist. He had to be made. The making was not done with chains. It was done with ideas. And the most powerful idea was this, that work is not merely a means of living. It is a duty, a calling, a measure of the soul. Weber traced the origin of this idea to Calvinist theology. The Reformers taught that salvation was predetermined, that God had already chosen who would be saved and who would be damned, and that no human action could change the verdict. But the anxiety this produced was unbearable. How do you live inside a sentence you cannot read? The Calvinists found a solution. Worldly success, they suggested, might be a sign of divine favor. Hard work and material prosperity did not earn salvation, but they hinted at it. Labor became a way of reading your own fate. The theology faded over time. The habit did not. What remained was a moral architecture. Work is good. Idleness is bad. The person who works hard is virtuous. The person who does not, who sits under a tree when there is a factory to attend, is not merely unproductive. He is morally suspect. Zygmunt Bauman, in Work, Consumerism, and the New Poor, called this what it was, a power struggle dressed in the language of ethics. The work ethic, he wrote, compelled workers to accept conditions that were neither noble nor consistent with their own sense of a good life, all in the name of a higher moral purpose. It told the poor that their resistance to factory discipline was not a defense of freedom. It was laziness. It was sin. The trick worked in 2 stages. First, work was given moral weight. You should work, not because you need to, but because it is right. Then, work was given material promise. If you work hard enough, you will be rewarded with wealth, status, freedom. The 2 stages reinforced each other. If you failed, it was because you had not worked hard enough, which meant you were both unsuccessful and immoral. The failure was total. By the time the industrial age was fully underway, the free laborer, the weaver who set his own hours, the craftsman who knew when to stop, had been transformed into the worker. The worker did not own his time. He sold it, and he had been taught to believe that selling it was the highest thing he could do. The factory, Bauman observed, was the prototype of the modern prison, second only to the army barracks. But the factory age would not last forever. A new kind of society was coming, one that needed not workers but buyers, and it would need a new kind of ethic to match. Chapter 6. Coffee, a Cup, and a Self. A woman walks into a cafe on a Tuesday morning. She does not need coffee. She had coffee at home. What she needs, though she would not use this word, is the version of herself that orders a latte in a place like this. The paper cup with the familiar logo. The 5 minutes of standing at the counter while the milk steams. The walk to the office holding something that says, without saying anything, that she is a person of a certain kind. Urban, considered, not rushed, or at least not visibly. She is not being foolish. She is doing what the entire structure of her world has taught her to do. Jean Baudrillard, writing in the Consumer Society, made the observation that changed how we think about buying. When we consume, he said, we do not consume objects, we consume signs. The coffee is an object. It has use value. It warms. It stimulates. It tastes of something. But the use value is not what you are paying $4 for. You are paying for the sign value. The meaning the object carries in a system of differences. Sophistication, leisure, taste. A particular position in the social order. Communicated without words. Use value can be satisfied. You drink the coffee. The thirst is gone. Sign value cannot be satisfied because it does not address a need. It addresses an identity, and identity is never finished. This is the mechanism that makes consumer society run. Not greed, something more intimate than greed. The deep human anxiety about who you are. The fear that without the right signals, you might be no one at all. Baudrillard saw that the consumer does not stand outside the system of signs, choosing freely among them. The consumer is pulled into a network of symbols that interpret one another. You cannot understand what confident means without elegant, and you cannot display elegant without tasteful, and each of these requires its own set of purchases. The network has no edge. There is always another sign to acquire, another gap between who you are and who the signs say you could be. Every brand understands this. Every brand is, at bottom, an answer to the question, who am I? The luxury watch does not tell better time. The designer bag does not hold more. They tell a story about the person carrying them, and the person carrying them is buying the story, not the stitching. In a producer society, your identity was your work. I am a teacher. I am a steelworker. I am a nurse. These were stable, legible, shared. Your father's generation introduced themselves this way and felt the sentence was complete. In a consumer society, identity migrates from what you do to what you buy. The sentence is never complete. The labels change with the season. Last year's purchase no longer says what it said. The self must be updated, accessorized, maintained, and the maintenance never ends. This is not a minor shift. It is a revolution in what a human being is for. In the old arrangement, a person existed first and consumed second. In the new one, consumption is the activity through which the person comes into existence. You are not a self who shops. You are a self made of shopping. Pull the purchases away, and the question, who am I, has no floor. Baudrillard's verdict was precise. People never consume the object itself. They use the object as a sign that distinguishes them. And if the sign is all that remains, then the person who cannot purchase is not just poor. That person is unfinished, a rough draft of a human being, a self that never loaded. We are getting close to the center now. Chapter 7. The year 1930, and a quiet reversal. In the summer of 1930, while the world economy was beginning to collapse, John Maynard Keynes sat down and wrote a short, strange, optimistic essay. He called it Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. In it, he predicted that within 100 years, technological progress would solve the problem of production so completely that the great challenge facing humanity would no longer be scarcity. It would be leisure. His grandchildren, he wrote, would work perhaps 15 hours a week. The real question, the difficult, unprecedented question, would be how to fill all that empty time. How to live well when survival no longer requires effort. It is now nearly a century later. Keynes's grandchildren work 50 hours a week and answer emails at midnight. The prediction was not wrong about production. It was wrong about what production was for. What Keynes did not foresee was that the economy would stop asking people to produce and start asking them to consume, and that this shift would change not just the structure of markets, but the moral furniture of ordinary life. Before the Great Depression, the dominant ethic in Western economies was the producer ethic. Work hard, save, defer gratification, waste is a sin, thrift is a virtue. The good citizen is the one who makes things, accumulates slowly, leaves something behind. These were not just economic recommendations. They were moral convictions, rooted in Protestant theology and reinforced by 2 centuries of industrial culture. The Depression shattered the logic underneath them. Keynes diagnosed the crisis as a failure not of production but of demand. Factories could make more than people were buying. The shelves were full. The warehouses were full. The problem was that no one was spending. The solution, Keynes argued, was to stimulate consumption, through government spending, through credit, through any means that would put money into circulation and keep it moving. This was an economic argument, but it carried a moral revolution inside it. If consumption drives growth, then consuming is not indulgence. It is contribution. The spender is not wasteful. The spender is doing the economy's most essential work. And if spending is virtuous, then saving, the old virtue, the grandmother virtue, the darned socks and cold supper virtue, is quietly reclassified as a drag on progress. The person who refuses to buy is no longer admirable. That person is a problem. The reversal did not happen overnight. It took decades. But by the second half of the 20th century, consumer economies across the world had internalized a new moral framework. Credit systems emerged to let people spend money they had not yet earned. Advertising industries grew to manufacture desires people had not yet felt. Government policy in country after country shifted from encouraging production to stimulating demand. The slogans on the street changed. A generation earlier, they had celebrated the worker. Now they celebrated the buyer. The customer is king. You deserve it. Treat yourself. Life is short. Bauman noticed something crucial in this transition. In the producer society, luxury and excess had been morally suspect. Frugality was dignified. In the consumer society, the values reversed completely. Frugality became quaint, then suspicious, then pathetic. To live simply was no longer a mark of character. It was a mark of defeat, of not having made it, of being, in the language that was forming beneath the surface, a failed consumer. And with that reversal, the moral position of the poor changed too. In the old ethic, the poor were unfortunate. They deserved sympathy, charity, the protection of those who had more. In the new ethic, The poor were not contributing. They were not buying. They were not performing the central act of citizenship. They were increasingly in the way. The ground had shifted beneath them, and no one had told them it was moving. Chapter 8. The aesthetic of everything. A woman in a cafe says to the man across from her that the relationship no longer brings her emotional value. She says it calmly. She has thought about it. The man sitting across from her understands every word in the sentence and still does not understand what has happened to him. He wants to ask, when did love become something that is evaluated like a product? When did the question change from is this good to does this feel right to me? But he does not ask, because he already knows the answer. The question changed everywhere, all at once, and he changed with it. Bauman identified the deepest consequence of consumer society in a single sentence. In our time, he wrote, it is aesthetics, not ethics, that is integrated into the life of the consumer society. The governing question is no longer what should I do? It is what kind of experience am I having? This is not a small substitution. It redesigns the entire interior of a life. In the old moral framework, the producer framework, work was judged by its value. Was this work honest? Did it contribute? Did it serve something larger than the person doing it? A bricklayer and a banker could both pass the test. The standard was ethical. It asked about duty, purpose, contribution. And because the standard applied equally, it carried within it a kind of democracy. All useful labor had dignity. In the consumer framework, the standard migrates from value to experience. The question is no longer whether your work matters. The question is whether your work feels good, whether it is interesting, whether it offers variety, autonomy, the particular modern pleasure of self-expression. The office must be beautiful. The commute must be tolerable. The colleagues must be stimulating. If the experience is not right, the work is not worth doing, regardless of what it produces. Apply this lens to the full range of a life, and watch what happens. Relationships must provide emotional value. Friendships must spark joy. Vacations must be memorable, not in the sense of being lived deeply, but in the sense of being photographable. Even grief is suspect if it lasts too long or feels too heavy. The aesthetic eye does not tolerate ugliness. It does not tolerate friction. It does not tolerate the long, dull middle of anything. Byung-Chul Han called the signature of this age smoothness. Smooth screens, smooth surfaces, smooth interactions, nothing that resists, nothing that cuts, nothing that refuses to be pleasant. The smooth world asks only for your approval. It has abolished the negative. It does not want your objection, your discomfort, your slow, uncertain thinking. It wants your like. And here is where the trap closes on the poor. In a society governed by ethics, the poor had a place. Their labor was valued. Their endurance was respected. They might have had little, but they were inside the moral community. In a society governed by aesthetics, the poor have no place at all. Their lives are not interesting. Their consumption is not visible. Their experience, the daily grind, the cramped room, the meal that is fuel and nothing more, produces no story worth telling. They become, in the consumer society's quiet judgment, not unfortunate, not oppressed, simply boring. And boring, in an aesthetic world, is the one unforgivable thing. Chapter 9. The Flawed Consumer. A delivery rider pulls over at 2 a.m, sits on the curb beside his electric scooter, and opens a container of instant noodles. He eats quickly. The app on his phone is still running. If another order comes in, he needs to be moving within 90 seconds, or the algorithm will deprioritize him. While he eats, he scrolls. A video appears. A comedian doing a bit about poor people, about how they smell, about how they make bad decisions, about how they always have children they cannot afford. The writer laughs at one of the jokes. Then he stops laughing because he has recognized something in the punchline. He puts the phone down. He finishes the noodles. The app pings. He stands up and rides into the dark. This is what Bauman meant by the phrase "the new poor." In the consumer society, the poor are defined by what they cannot do. They cannot consume. They cannot participate in the central ritual of modern life. They cannot answer the question, "Who am I?" with the only vocabulary the culture now accepts, the vocabulary of purchase. The shift is quiet, but total. When poverty is a misfortune, the correct response is compassion. When poverty is a defect, the correct response is suspicion. And suspicion is exactly what the modern world delivers. The poor are not merely pitied less, they are actively distrusted. They are described on social media and in public conversation as lazy, short-sighted, undisciplined, ignorant, as though poverty were a character flaw that leaked outward into behavior, rather than a condition shaped by forces larger than any individual. Think about what happens to a person inside this description. The unemployed worker does not merely lose income, he loses the right to be seen as a full human being. Bauman observed that the most common complaint among the unemployed is not hunger. It is the feeling of being locked inside their own homes, the restlessness, the shame of having nothing to do in a world that has made busyness the only proof of worth. They feel not just idle but illegitimate, as though their existence, without the validating stamp of consumption, has become a kind of trespass. And the cruelest part is this: they often agree with the verdict. The man on the curb with the instant noodles laughed at the joke about poor people. He laughed because the joke was funny. He also laughed because the logic of consumer society has entered him so deeply that he can see himself through its eyes, and what he sees is someone who has failed. Not someone who was failed. Someone who failed. The grammar matters. In the consumer world, poverty is always in the active voice. This is what it means when a society replaces ethics with aesthetics and replaces the worker with the buyer. The moral safety net disappears. Not the economic one, that may or may not survive, depending on the politics of the moment. The moral one. The assumption, older than capitalism, older than industrialism, that the suffering of the weak places an obligation on the strong. That compassion is not optional but foundational, that the measure of a society is how it treats the people who have the least. When poverty becomes a moral failing, that obligation dissolves. Helping the poor is no longer noble. It is enabling. It is rewarding failure. The rich owe the poor nothing, not even attention, and the poor owe the world an apology. This is the landscape the modern person inhabits, a world where your worth is your consumption, your identity is your purchase, and your poverty is your fault. The architecture is complete. But there is one more force that holds it all in place. Not money, not advertising, not ideology, exactly. Something quieter, something that touches every moment of every day, something so familiar that almost no one thinks to question it. Time. Chapter 10. The promise that never arrived. Keynes's grandchildren are real. They work in glass towers and open-plan offices. They carry devices that connect them to their jobs 24 hours a day. They eat lunch at their desks and feel guilty about the 12 minutes it takes. On the best nights, they leave the office at 7. On the worst, they answer messages from the kitchen counter at 11, while a meal cools beside them, untouched. The sociologist Hartmut Rosa spent 2 decades studying what he calls social acceleration, the systematic increase in the speed of nearly everything in modern life. His analysis identifies three distinct layers, each feeding the others. The first is technological acceleration. Machines get faster, communication gets faster, transportation gets faster. A letter that once took weeks now arrives in milliseconds. A journey that once took days now takes hours. Every new technology compresses the time required to accomplish a given task. This is the layer Keynes saw. This is the layer that was supposed to liberate us. The second layer is the acceleration of social change. Institutions, careers, relationships, knowledge, all of these now have shorter half-lives than they once did. The degree you earned at 22 is outdated by 30. The company you joined may not exist in 10 years. The skills you spent a decade mastering can be displaced by a single software update. Yesterday's achievements no longer count today. The resume must be refreshed. The credentials must be renewed. The race has no memory. The third layer is the acceleration of the pace of life itself. This is the one people feel most directly. Despite all the time saved by faster technology, people report having less time, not more. They feel rushed. They feel behind. They compress meals, shorten phone calls, sleep less, and still cannot outrun the sensation that the day is not long enough. Rosa's insight is that these three layers are not parallel. They form a cycle. Technology saves time, but the time saved is immediately filled with new obligations generated by social change. Social change demands adaptation, which demands more activity per unit of time. More activity per unit of time produces the feeling of acceleration, which drives demand for faster technology. The wheel turns. No one is pedaling. Everyone is running. This is why Keynes was wrong. He assumed that efficiency would produce rest, that once we could do everything faster, we would choose to do less. He did not account for the possibility that the system would absorb every minute freed by technology and convert it into a new demand. That doing things faster would not mean doing fewer things. It would mean doing more things, faster, forever. The result is a paradox that almost every modern person has felt without being able to articulate. We live in the most technologically advanced civilization in history. We can do in seconds what our grandparents needed days to accomplish, and we are more exhausted than they ever were. Not because we are weak. Because the system that surrounds us does not permit rest. It converts every efficiency into a new expectation, and every expectation into a new inadequacy. The acceleration has no destination. That is the point. It is not heading somewhere. It is not building toward a future in which we will finally arrive and sit down. It sustains itself. It feeds on its own motion, and the fuel it burns is a human life. But what keeps the individual inside the wheel when no one is standing behind them with a whip? What makes a free person in a free society voluntarily accelerate until the acceleration begins to destroy them? The answer is a clock, not a physical one, a moral one. Chapter 11. The Invisible Master Called Time. A woman on a subway is doing arithmetic in her head. She has 7 minutes before her next meeting. Her mother has called twice today. She has not called back. She is now calculating whether 7 minutes is enough to call, say the necessary things, and hang up before the doors open at her stop. She factors in the greeting, the questions about her father's knee, the inevitable pause when her mother asks when she is coming home. She cannot afford the pause. The pause alone could cost her 2 minutes. She decides not to call. She does not experience this as a choice. She experiences it as a fact. There is not enough time. The meeting is real. The mother is also real, but the mother is not on the schedule, and what is not on the schedule does not, in the economy of her day, exist. This is what Rosa means when he says that time has become a form of governance. We are accustomed to thinking of time as neutral. The clock treats everyone equally. 24 hours for the rich, 24 hours for the poor. If you feel rushed, the problem is your time management, your discipline, your failure to prioritize. The clock is innocent. You are the one who cannot keep up. Rosa dismantles this assumption. Time, he argues, is not a natural given. It is a social construction, the way a society organizes time, what counts as wasted, what counts as productive, what pace is expected, what delays are tolerated, shapes behavior as powerfully as any law. More powerfully, in fact, because a law can be seen, debated, resisted. A time norm is invisible. It feels like nature. It feels like your own voice inside your head, telling you to hurry. The philosopher Byung-Chul describes the endpoint of this process. In earlier societies, discipline came from outside. The factory bell, the foreman's eye, the priest's sermon. You knew who was watching, and you could, at least in principle, refuse. In the modern world, the watcher has moved inside. We discipline ourselves. We set our own alarms, build our own schedules, track our own performance, punish ourselves for falling behind. We are, as Hahn puts it, both the prisoner and the guard, and we can no longer tell whose voice is giving the orders. The phrase time is money is treated as common sense. It is not common sense. It is the most successful piece of moral propaganda in modern history. Once you accept it, every minute spent resting is a minute of income forfeited. Every hour given to friendship, to daydreaming, to the slow and useless activity of simply being alive, carries a price tag. Leisure becomes waste. Waste becomes guilt. Guilt becomes acceleration. Rosa calls this a form of totalitarianism. Not the old kind, with a dictator and a flag, but a new kind, soft and pervasive. No single authority enforces it. No institution owns it. It applies to everyone. It penetrates every domain: work, family, education, rest. And it is nearly impossible to resist, because resisting it looks, from the inside, like failure. Consider what this means for the person who stops. The person who chooses to work less, earn less, buy less, move slower. In a society governed by the time equals money equation, that person has not made a lifestyle choice. That person has committed a kind of treason against the only value the system recognizes. They will not be punished by law. They will be punished by something worse, the quiet consensus that they have given up, that they lack ambition, that they are, in the language we keep returning to, not working hard enough. The man on the screen and the clock on the wall are saying the same thing. They are both saying, your time must be filled with value, and value means output, and output means more. The sentence has no period. It does not end. It accelerates. And inside this acceleration, something begins to break. Chapter 12. 5. Ways to lose yourself. A traveler stands at a famous lookout point, raises her phone, takes the photograph, lowers the phone, and moves on. She will keep the image for years. She will not remember being there, not the temperature of the wind, not the color of the light at that hour, not the sound the trees made, if there were trees. The photograph will sit in a folder with 400 others, each one a place she visited without arriving. She was there. Her body confirms it. Something in her does not. Rosa calls this the alienation of space. It is the first of 5 fractures that acceleration produces in the modern person, and it is the gentlest. The others cut deeper. In traditional life, space was inhabited. You knew a place because you had been slow in it. You had walked its streets enough times to stop seeing them, which is the beginning of truly seeing them. The modern traveler does not inhabit space. The modern traveler passes through it. The itinerary replaces the experience. The check-in replaces the encounter, and the space, unable to make contact with the person moving through it, becomes a backdrop. Something seen but not felt, captured but not held. The second fracture is the alienation of objects. Your grandmother wore one coat for years. It shaped itself to her body. It became, in some small and real way, part of her, a thing she would mend rather than replace, because replacing it would mean losing something that had learned her shape. In an accelerated world, objects do not stay long enough to learn anything. The phone is replaced every 2 years. The wardrobe turns over with the season. Nothing accumulates the weight of use. Nothing becomes yours in the way that things become yours only through time. The third is the alienation of action. Rosa describes it with a personal confession. He says he is writing a book, but he cannot tell whether he is writing it because he wants to or because the deadline has been postponed twice and he can no longer not write it. The distinction matters. In one case, the action belongs to him. In the other, the action is happening to him, wearing his hands. Most modern people, if they are honest, cannot tell the difference on most days. We do what the schedule says. We do what the list says. We do what the quiet voice of social expectation says. Be productive, be disciplined, be someone who finishes things. And after enough years of compliance, the question, what do I actually want to do, becomes difficult to answer. Not because we lack options, because we have forgotten what wanting feels like when it is not prompted. The fourth is the alienation of time. Rosa observes a paradox. When you are absorbed in something you love, time passes quickly, but the memory is long and rich. When you scroll through short videos for 2 hours, time also passes quickly, but the memory is empty. Both experiences compress the present. Only one leaves a trace. The accelerated world is full of the second kind, experiences that consume time without producing memory, days that vanish, weeks you cannot account for, a life that, looked at from a distance, seems to have happened to someone else. The fifth fracture is the one that holds the others together, the alienation of the self. If your spaces do not know you, if your objects do not carry your shape, if your actions do not come from your will, if your time leaves no mark in your memory, then who are you? What story can you tell about your own life? What thread connects Tuesday to Wednesday to the year you turned 30 to the person you are becoming? Rosa is careful to note that these 5 alienations are his own extension of Marx, not Marx's original list. Marx spoke of alienation from labor, from the product of labor, from other people, and from human nature. Rosa adds the dimensions that acceleration has made visible, the ways in which speed itself, not just exploitation, can strip a life of its coherence. The result is a person who is busy and empty at the same time, full of activity, vacant of meaning, running at high speed through a life they cannot quite feel. And this brings us, at last, to the only question that matters. Is there a way back? Chapter 13. The Sound a Real Life. Makes a grandmother hums to a sleeping child. The room is dark. The song has no words, or the words have been forgotten, which is the same thing. The child's breathing has slowed. The grandmother's hand rests on the small back, rising and falling. There is no productivity in this scene, no aesthetic, no sign value, no metric by which it could be evaluated and found excellent. If you asked the grandmother what she was doing, she would say nothing. She would be wrong. She is doing the most important thing a human being can do. She is being present to another life, and the other life is present to her, and the two of them, in this room, in this silence, are making a sound that the modern world has almost forgotten how to hear. Rosa calls this sound resonance. It is not a metaphor. Or rather, It is a metaphor that points at something more precise than most theories manage to name. Resonance is what happens when a person and a piece of the world enter into a relationship in which both are changed. Not a transaction, not a consumption, not an experience optimized for pleasure. A mutual vibration. The world speaks to you, you speak back. Neither of you is the same afterward. You have felt this. Not often, perhaps, but you have felt it. Standing in front of a painting that did something to your chest before your mind caught up. Reading a sentence that seemed to have been written by someone who had lived inside your exact silence. Walking through a city at dawn and feeling, for a few minutes, that the city knew you were there. Sitting with a friend and saying something true and watching their face change and knowing that the change was not performance. It was recognition. These moments are not rare because we are broken. They are rare because the world we have built is loud in a very specific way. It is loud with speed, with commerce, with the unending noise of optimization. And resonance requires a kind of quiet. Not silence. Quiet. The willingness to be affected by something you did not choose, something you cannot control. Something that does not increase your productivity or confirm your identity or advance your position in any system. This is where the threads of tonight's argument come together. 400 years ago, the unity of truth, goodness, and beauty was broken. Reason was separated from wisdom. The measurable was separated from the felt. What followed was a civilization of extraordinary power and extraordinary emptiness. A world that can send a photograph across the planet in a second and cannot tell you why the photograph matters. The consumer society filled the emptiness with purchase. The acceleration society filled it with speed. The time regime filled it with obligation. Each was an attempt to answer the question, what is a life for? And each answered it the same way. A life is for producing, consuming, and moving faster. The person who could not keep up was not a person in difficulty. That person was a flawed consumer. A failed self. A moral problem to be solved or ignored. Hegel saw 2 centuries ago that truth cannot live in abstraction. It must be concrete. It must sit on a horse. It must have a date and an address. Kierkegaard went further. He said he needed a truth he could live for and die for. Not a theorem, not a system, but something that bleeds when cut. Something that runs through the body like a second bloodstream. Rosa arrives at the same place from a different direction. The opposite of alienation, he says, is not freedom. Freedom, in the modern sense, is just another form of acceleration, the freedom to choose faster, to move faster, to consume faster. The opposite of alienation is resonance. The experience of being in a world that answers back. And Caputo, the philosopher who began our inquiry into truth, closes the circle. In the postmodern world, he writes, truth is not dead. It has been released from the tyranny of the capital letter. Truth is no longer one, eternal, abstract. It is many, temporal, lived. It is what happens in a specific event, between specific people, in a specific moment that will not come again. It is small and plural and ours. The grandmother humming to the child is not performing an act of philosophy, but she is standing in the place where all of tonight's questions converge. She is in contact with something real. She is not optimizing. She is not accelerating. She is not consuming a sign. She is present, and the presence is enough, and in that enough there is something that the entire modern world, for all its speed and brilliance, has not managed to reproduce. It cannot be bought. It cannot be scheduled. It cannot be manufactured by an algorithm or sold in a live stream. It can only be heard, and it can only be heard by someone who has stopped moving long enough to listen. Ending, we began in a supermarket aisle, with a man who could not remember what he came for. He came for something real. That is the answer he could not find beneath the fluorescent lights, between the shelves of things that promised to complete him. He came for the thing that every system he lives inside, the consumer system, the acceleration system, the moral system that measures his worth by his output, has taught him to forget. He came for contact with a world that answers back. 400 years ago, truth was taken apart. Goodness was sent to one room, beauty to another, and the measurable was given the keys to the house. What followed was an extraordinary civilization that learned to produce everything except the feeling that any of it mattered. We filled the gap with buying. We filled it with speed. We filled it with the anxious performance of a self that could never quite be finished. And the gap remained. It remains tonight. But it is not permanent. The grandmother with the sleeping child knows something the system does not. The friend who says the true thing in the quiet room knows it. The person who stands before a particular tree at a particular hour and feels something shift, that person knows it too. Resonance is not an escape from the modern world. It is a door inside it. A door that opens not outward into some better system, but inward, into the capacity to be moved by what is here. If this made the world look slightly different tonight, stay. There is more coming. We are not in a hurry. And the question I leave you with is the one that belongs to you alone. You cannot answer it tonight. You may not answer it for years, but it will be there when you are ready. If your worth were not measured by what you bought, or how fast you moved, or what you produced, who would you turn out to be?